What is going on, everybody? Welcome back and welcome into day 2 of free agency. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Of course, you can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. And please make sure to subscribe below if you have not already. Let's start with the same topic we've been discussing over and over. I'm not going to actually spend a ton of time on it. I was very much expecting to spend the vast majority of my time on talking Aaron Rodgers today, whether that be return, retire, or move to the New York Jets in some sort of trade. I expected some sort of decision on Monday. We did not get a decision on Monday. All the reports, I guess the reports are crazy, right? Like, let's just be real and call it what it is, right? Like, it wouldn't have been like another day in Aaron Rodgers land. I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers specifically, but like in this topic of conversation without disputed reports all over the place, right? Trey Wingo reports that the deal is done. Everyone immediately refutes that is the case and says the deal is not done. Like earlier in the day, it's like everything's gaining steam and that, terms have been agreed to. Other people saying there no terms have not been agreed to. Like, we are just in complete no man's land with this conversation, with getting reports from all over the place. And that makes things extremely frustrating, right? Like, it's one thing if we are getting consistent reporting from everyone that's saying this is what's happening, this is what's happening. And towards the end of the day, we did get a little bit more in that realm where everyone seemed to be saying the Jets are cautiously optimistic. And what did we find out, right? We found out a million new ways to basically say the Jets are optimistic that this is going to happen. I think Adam Schefter posted a new one saying there's mounting indications. Mounting indications. That is just absolutely perfect. Like, there are mounting indications that Aaron Rodgers is going to end up with the New York Jets, but like, this is still ongoing, right? And like I said, it's some level of frustrating for sure. Just overall, I'm not putting blame on Rodgers or the Jets or the Packers or anyone at this point, just because all the information is conflicting as to exactly where where this lies and who's ultimately still making a decision. And I do know at this point, I actually posted on Twitter, it seems like the vast majority of the frustration is with Aaron Rodgers in some capacity, although there's certainly some with the Packers as well. I don't know. I think at this point, even though I very much expected a decision prior to Monday, and quite frankly would have liked a decision prior to Monday, I do ultimately understand that there is a ton of pressure on a lot of groups, on the Packers, on the Jets, and on Aaron Rodgers to try to come up with something in a very delicate situation. I've discussed this previously. I'm not going to go over it ad nauseum, but like with the Jets, like they don't have any other options at this point. We'll get to more on that in just a moment, but like, it's Aaron Rodgers or bust. And if they miss on Aaron Rodgers, they are in a very rough spot in 2023 when it comes to the quarterback position. I suppose they could make an extremely aggressive run at Lamar Jackson. Maybe they take a spin at Ryan Tannehill. There were some, rumors and buzz that they might take a spin at Matthew Stafford, but it's not great options if they don't land Aaron Rodgers in some capacity, right? For the Packers, like, this is still delicate. And even though they've basically come out and said, whether it be via Mark Murphy or, Brian Gutekunst's last press conference, that they want to move on and go in a different direction with Jordan Love, they haven't said it completely in that way. But if you don't even need to read between the lines at this point, right? It is very clear that the Packers want to move forward with Jordan Love, but that is still a very delicate situation for really the face of their franchise for a very, very long time now, over 15 years. And like I said, you have to be very careful. And for Aaron Rodgers, there is a contract at play. For the Packers, there's compensation at play. For the Jets, there's compensation at play. There's so many things here. So yes, if it is just at this point that Aaron is holding everything up, even then I have some accident forgiveness because I know the delicacy of this situation. You have to move to New York City. You have to play for a team that you've never played for before. You've played for one team your entire career. Portions of your legacy are on the line. There will be portions of the fan base that will be upset if he ever puts on a jersey that's not green and gold. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. And I'm not even going over everything, right? So I understand the decision. But if it is just on Aaron at this point, yeah, then I think there's a little bit more. Frustration's the wrong word, but like let's do something at this point, right? And quite frankly, if the Packers are dead set, right, on that they're going to move forward with Jordan Love, you can make an argument that the Jets have by far and away the most to lose, and that Rodgers is kind of holding the Jets quote unquote hostage a little bit more than he is Green Bay. If Green Bay's made the decision to move to Jordan and basically have said, you either need to play for the Jets or retire, which again, we don't know 1,000,000% that that's the exact verbiage that they're using at this point. But if that is in fact the case, they have their quarterback that they're going to go forward with in 2023. And they know that they're turning the page in some capacity. In some way, they've made their decision. And really the only thing that Green Bay has yet to sort of figure out is Aaron going to play for the Jets? Meaning, are they going to get compensation in return? So Green Bay, I think, a little bit less in the lurch here on what happens. The Jets, meanwhile, are seeing all these quarterbacks go elsewhere. Jimmy Garoppolo signs with the Raiders. Derek Carr signs with the Saints. We can just do it now, right? They lose Mike White to the Dolphins. Jarrett Stidham goes to the Broncos. Sam Darnold to the 49ers. Case Keenum to the Texans. Jameis Winston stays with the Saints. Like, all of these quarterbacks are going off the board. And clearly the key ones here, Jimmy Garoppolo and Derek Carr, who had the Jets been all in on either of them, very much, the Jets may have one of those quarterbacks right now. And instead of going in that direction, they pumped the brakes and said, we are holding out for Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is our guy. If Aaron continues to drag this out, the Jets just become, like I said this before, but like in complete no man's land, right? Like they are trapped. So like I said, the Packers are moving forward with Jordan Love. If that is their prerogative, then they're not left too much in the lurch either way. It just depends on what draft compensation they get. And you might say, well, what about the salary cap, Andy? All right, well, if they are dead set, again, on Jordan Love being their quarterback, there's two options for Aaron. They're going to trade him or he's going to retire. And both of those situations, in all likelihood, end up with a $40 million cap hit. If he retires, they could do it post June 1st, and that could clear some additional things up and allow them to use more salary. But they're not going to get that salary relief until after June 1st anyway. So it's not like they go out and they get that salary cap relief immediately. So like I said, it's a very delicate situation. Trade compensation, Aaron Rodgers contract, Aaron Rodgers legacy. I do feel like Tuesday is going to be the day. I don't know why. It's just my gut feel. I don't have any inside information, but I do feel like Tuesday is going to be the day. And tomorrow, in some capacity, we will likely be talking about Aaron Rodgers' decision, whether that be that he's a member of the New York Jets, whether that he retires, or if we actually get some sort of chaos element into this where things didn't go according to plan and now Green Bay, Rodgers, the Jets all have to go in some sort of different direction, right? So we will see, but I do feel like Tuesday is going to be that day. All right, quickly on Keisean Nixon. If you didn't catch it, I did a quick about 7 to 8 minute video on Keisean Nixon, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but clearly this is a huge piece of news for the Packers. Nixon remains a member of the team. He was really the remaining key free agent that I'm sure they really wanted to keep in-house. Allen Lazard's contract is probably going to make it, not feasible to retain him going forward in 2023 and beyond. And Mercedes Lewis, you could make an argument for, but I think if we're comparing apples to apples, I think Nixon's role is probably a little bit more important as a playmaker. Not saying Lewis's isn't. You know how much I love Mercedes Lewis, so that is not a knock on Mercedes Lewis. But I think probably Lewis might be tied to Aaron Rodgers in some capacity. He could retire. He could look at his best chance to win a Super Bowl ring. There's a lot of things that could happen with Mercedes. So as you look at young players who have playmaking ability, you're looking at Keisean Nixon, right? So for Green Bay to get him back, huge win there. 1 year, up to $6 million. I sort of presuppose that it would potentially be 1 year 5 or 2 years 10 is kind of what I was guessing. So 1 year up to 6 makes a ton of sense. I'm sure there's going to be some incentives, some void years to limit the damage in year 1 of that contract. I do wonder, and I mentioned this in my episode, my quick episode on Nixon, but I do wonder if a longer term deal would have made a little bit more sense because, the window is not exactly open right now for Green Bay and you're signing this player to a 1 year deal. It makes it a little bit more complex, but I think the biggest win here is that you're keeping him in the building for the time being, giving yourself another option next year to maybe sign him to a longer term deal. Maybe that's something that you work on with Nixon throughout the course of the year. And it does give you some leeway if he struggles in 2023 and has maybe a come down and maybe doesn't have the same explosiveness or return ability, or we see him not be able to hang on special teams or as a nickel corner, any of those things. If all of a sudden there's some signs there that 2022 is just a one-hit wonder and that's it for Nixon, it does save you maybe some potential long-term, egg on your face by signing a player who had 1 year, not even like a full year, right? Like a half year of really astounding play and then was never able to live up to it after that. So Nixon is going to gain some free agent, options next year as he's still in the prime of his career, and Green Bay keeps him in-house for the time being and makes sure that he doesn't head to another team. So overall, like this for both Keisean Nixon and the Green Bay Packers. I think it makes a ton of sense. Meanwhile, Bill Huber did have some updates on the Packers. He did actually, prior to the Nixon signing, say that the Packers were working hard to retain Nixon. And then noteworthy, because they were working hard to retain Nixon, he also reported that they really wanted to keep Adrian Amos as well. Now, this is a very interesting one for a variety of reasons. And I do think if you bring Amos back, it's not like he's 40 years old, right? He's just entering the 30s. And I think you're hoping that last year was just an aberration. It was the one-off and the exception to the rule. And the rule is that Adrian Amos is maybe the most consistent safety that I've ever seen play in the NFL, legitimately. Like, he is that consistent, that sound of a tackler, always where he's supposed to be, good communicator. Like, that's what you get out of Adrian Amos. 2022 was not that. And you do get worried with age a little bit. He looked, like I said, a step and a half, 2 steps slower last year than he did in previous seasons. But if you do get him back, I think there is some hope that maybe he can return to his previous form, but there's no guarantee there. And I think you do see him lose that step, and you do wonder if it's maybe the best idea to bring him back, or if maybe you want to go a little bit younger at that position. And as Ken Ingalls notes as well, if they do end up bringing him back, it ends up being a mistake almost no matter what, because had they been able to bring him back prior to his contract voiding, per Ken, they would have been able to save about $5.7 million, in this year's salary, had they been able to redo his contract prior to his contract voiding. So it does end up a little bit disadvantageous if you end up signing him now rather than just going back about a month, not even, to finish that deal prior to him actually voiding and hitting free agency. That being said, that can be a little bit easier said than done. If Adrian Amos wants to hit the open market and see what options he has available first, he has the right to do that. His contract voids. He doesn't have to negotiate with Green Bay ahead of time. And now he can negotiate with Green Bay and with 31 other teams potentially as well. So it did make sense for Amos to hit the open market, and Green Bay may just not have had the option to finish that deal prior to the start, or prior to his contract voiding. And now we're going to have to really compete with 31 other teams potentially for his services. So we will see what happens there. I still tend to believe it's probably best to go in a different direction, but if they brought him back, I wouldn't hate it, and I would understand that you're hoping that he just sort of reverts back to how he played in 2021, 2020, 2019, etc. So we will see what happens there. Meanwhile, Bill Huber also mentions that Dean Lowry and Robert Tonyan are in a holding pattern at this point. Doesn't seem like Green Bay is super aggressive with either player, but maybe is at least keeping tabs on what ends up happening with both of them on the free agent market. All right, let's go over some of the big things that happened in free agency on Monday. Let's start with the quarterbacks. I mentioned this, but Jimmy Garoppolo to the Raiders is a big deal, right? Not necessarily so much for the state of the NFL. Yes, Jimmy Garoppolo gets a starting opportunity with the Raiders. That affects Devontae Adams with the Raiders. That is going to reunite him with Josh McDaniels as the head coach with the Raiders, and obviously their relationship back from their time in New England. But I don't think that affects the overarching NFL, all that much, and what's going to happen in 2023 that much. But it does certainly change the quarterback market quite a bit, specifically for the New York Jets. And I know people were saying like, oh, now the Jets have to give the Packers even more. There's a couple things at play here, right? The first thing is the Jets, yes, are probably more desperate now. Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, both off the market. So the Jets are probably, yes, a little bit more desperate. The other side is that there's really no other teams that are probably fighting for Aaron Rodgers' services. Mark Murphy already said that they have not given any other teams permission to speak with Aaron Rodgers. So the Jets also know that they are the team, right? And with all the work that the Packers and the Jets have put into this, and the Jets have put in to wooing Aaron Rodgers to New York, like, this is one team or bust at this point. At least it would certainly seem that way. So yes, the Packers have some, sort of flexibility and the ability to, basically say, hey, we don't have to give up on Aaron Rodgers. But based on Mark Murphy's comments, I think the Jets know that they want him out and that they want to go in a different direction, and that there's no other teams that are competing for his services. So, the leverage there for Green Bay, probably not that great. Meanwhile, the Jets are desperate for a quarterback, so there's not much else out there. I just think that the sides are going to be able to agree to something that makes sense for Rodgers, the Jets, and the Packers. Still don't think it's going to be anything exorbitant, and I wouldn't expect anything huge out of this deal. I'm still hoping for nothing worse than a second round pick, but this is going to be very interesting to see what compensation ends up coming out of this. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, Mike White, the Jets quarterback, goes to the Dolphins, Stidham to the Broncos, Darnold to the 49ers, Keenum to the Texans, and the interesting one, Jameis Winston back to the Saints, who already signed Derek Carr. That was a weird one for me, but who knows? Maybe Winston just really likes it and feels like that's the best spot for his career at this point. All right, the big moves of the day, the ones that really moved the needle for me. I want to start with Javon Hargrave going to the 49ers. And that to me is a massive deal. And the reason being is that 49ers defense is already arguably the best in the NFL. And adding Javon Hargrave, who might be one of the league's most underrated players, was phenomenal for Philadelphia. That is a huge, huge pickup for that 49ers defensive line. Now, they lose McGlinchey, their offensive tackle, so they lose some from the offensive side of the ball, gain some on the defensive side of the ball. They were already really great on the defensive side of the ball, so maybe it would have been better served to use that money on the offensive side, maybe just keep Mike McGlinchey, who knows, but Hargrave is a huge signing for them and is going to make that defense just a massive, massive pain to go against. So big pickup for the 49ers. Really like the Broncos picking up 2 offensive linemen. They get Mike McGlinchey, beating out the Bears in that battle. They also get Ben Powers, who's an underrated guard coming over from the Ravens. Loved Powers coming out of college. He's got great strength and mobility. Listen, the Broncos had to find a way to salvage this Russell Wilson situation in some capacity, right? They put all of their chips, and I mean all of their chips, in the Russell Wilson basket, and it could not have turned out worse this past year. So what they basically had an option, right? Ride out this Russell Wilson contract and just wait until it's done with and go in a different direction, or go all in more and try to salvage Russell Wilson the best that you can. If you're going to do that, you probably need a new offensive-minded head coach and a new offense that's going to fit Russell Wilson maybe a little bit better, and you have to have better offensive line play. Those were probably the prerequisites to try to make this work. They go out and get Sean Payton in the offseason to be the head coach, which is a huge deal for them. They end up giving up draft capital for that, so they're even more sunk costs into this. And now they put huge free agent money into both Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers to try to shore up that offensive line and do their best to save this Russell Wilson experiment in Denver. I'm not sold it's going to work, but if it's going to, you need the line, you need the coaching. They're trying both things. If this doesn't work for Russell Wilson, it's probably just over, but they're going to try everything they can to make this work in Denver in 2023. Maybe the biggest one from a real well, certainly Hargrave is this as well, but from a relevancy standpoint for a team that's really competing for a Super Bowl this year, Jawan Taylor signs with the Chiefs, goes from the Jaguars to the Kansas City Chiefs. That probably spells the end of Orlando. Well, not probably, it will spell the end of Orlando Brown in Kansas City. So this is a huge pickup for the Chiefs, massive contract, and I think he's worse, honestly, than Orlando Brown at this point, but it's probably close. I think Taylor's a good tackle. I think he's probably slightly overpaid, both with the Jaguars previously and going into Kansas City this year, but he's going to fit really, really well. The Chiefs needed a really good veteran left tackle, and I think for the most part they get that in Jawan Taylor. So big pickup for the Chiefs. Jesse Bates goes to the Falcons. Maybe not a team that's set to compete, but that is a huge free agent that finds a new home and ends up going to Atlanta. They also traded for Jonnu Smith. And then Jamel Dean back to the Bucs. A really interesting move because I don't know that anyone really expected that. I don't know that the Bucs were expected to be really in on him, especially with how they're sort of turning over their roster. Dean would have had a huge market, out in free agency. He ends up back in Tampa, though, so I think that's certainly surprising, but a huge free agent off the board with him staying in Tampa. From a Packers standpoint, no Packers left in free agency as of yet. There were some names that we've discussed here on this show that maybe could have fit in Green Bay, or others have discussed as well. I discussed a little bit Jimmy Ward. It was more of like a pie in the sky. If Green Bay goes out and actually signs a big time player on defense, I thought Jimmy Ward could have made some sense. He ends up with the Houston Texans. I know others also mentioned with, the potential of Adrian Amos leaving, the potential of Rudy Ford leaving. I saw some people mention that maybe Von Bell could be a fit with the Packers at safety. He ends up with the Panthers on Monday. And remember, I should note here too, all of these are reported deals. None of them are officially signed yet because they can't sign until Wednesday. And we have seen some of these deals fall apart in the past. So none of them 1,000,000% signed, sealed, and delivered yet. But the vast majority of these deals will end up going through on Wednesday without question. And then the other one, teardrop from the eye a little bit. The guy I've been raving about all offseason that I thought maybe could be an under the radar signing for Green Bay, Josh Oliver, the tight end from the Ravens. Heartbreaking. Not only does he go off the board, not only does he get a much bigger contract than I think a lot of people expected, and like what maybe I was hoping for, but he goes to the Minnesota Vikings as well. And we'll talk more about the Vikings in just a moment, but that 2 tight end set with TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver, John Oliver would be not as good of a 2 tight end set, would provide some comedic humor to the Minnesota Vikings, but probably not as great of a run blocker. Josh Oliver, the former Ravens tight end, I really like that signing. He did get paid though. So this was somebody I was maybe expecting to be more, like I said, of an under the radar type free agent signing. The Vikings went out day one, signed him to a big deal. I think it was like 3 years, $21 million, averaging about obviously $7 million per year. So they went out and got him, but that will make a very good 2 tight end set with Hawkinson and with Oliver. Both of them can block, both of them can catch, and with what that offense wants to do, that's a really nice signing for Minnesota. So a bummer there, but those are 3 names that are off the board that I know some people, myself included, had potentially linked to Green Bay. All right, let's wrap things up with a quick look at the NFC North. The Chicago Bears, we knew were going to be extremely, extremely active. All of the free agent money in the world to spend. I thought this was an okay day for Chicago. They had huge free agent signings in mind. I actually think the biggest news for the NFC North here might have been that the Bears missed on Mike McGlinchey, because that would have been a really nice signing for their offensive line. You know, I think really would have potentially solidified their offensive line. Now, they did make a move there as well. They get Nate Davis, who is a really nice interior signing, but they do still have that hole at right tackle that McGlinchey would have filled so incredibly well. So the miss there, I think, is big for Chicago. As mentioned, they go out and get Nate Davis. They get DeMarcus Walker to try and help their edge rush, but their edge rush is a nightmare right now. You have to think that maybe they're going to try to address that in the draft in some capacity. And then the interesting thing, they go all out for inside linebackers. Interesting because they traded away Roquan Smith just last season. Interesting because Jack Sanborn actually looked pretty darn good as an undrafted free agent. Like, they had this value guy on their roster who was potentially going to be able to play some significant snaps for them on the extreme cheap. And instead, they go out and get Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. And both of those linebackers I like. And I would have probably liked either of them on their own. Getting both seems like a little bit of overkill, especially with Sanborn on the roster already. But spending premium money at a sort of non-premium position for a linebacker in Tremaine Edmonds, who is a physical freak. He can hold up at the point of attack. He can get sideline to sideline. He's a good player. There's no question about it. And that Bears, the middle of the Bears defense with Edmonds and Edwards and potentially Jack Sanborn subbing in as well, or at least providing depth, that's going to be a tough group to deal with in the middle of that defense. But that's a ton of money for Edmonds. I really actually liked the Edwards signing. I think he's one of the most undervalued players in the entire NFL. He just plays the position the right way. They had the Wisconsin combo, right? In Edwards and Sanborn that I think would have been pretty good together. Now, they probably needed a coverage guy in that situation, which is what Tremaine Edmonds gives them. So I understand their vision here, but it is a ton of money into the inside linebacker position. Like I said, Sanborn was a pretty good player that they had on the complete cheap side of things. So they took a lot of the resources they have. They still have a ton left, but a lot of those resources put him at inside linebacker, an okay edge rusher, a solid guard, but they really missed on McGlinchey. Like I said, this was an okay day. They already got DJ Moore, which is a really big pickup for them. They moved back in the draft, got a ton of future draft capital. So I think the Bears are mostly headed in the right direction here. But I think if you're a Packer fan, with what could have been on day one for the Bears in free agency, I think you're okay with what transpired here. Now, a little bit of bad news is they are doing this the smart way. They are front-loading Tremaine Edmonds' contract, which is exactly what they should be doing. And it pains me to see the Bears actually managing this offseason in a way that's really, really smart. Now, just because you do smart things with your salary cap and get a bunch of draft picks and have free agent money to spend does not all of a sudden make you a contender. It doesn't mean that you got the right guys. It doesn't mean that they're going to fit together. It doesn't mean that you have premium talent. And as I look at the Chicago Bears team, as of right now, I still think they are missing high-end premium talent on their roster, but they got better on Monday and they're doing a lot of the things the right way. And this still could be a team that accelerates rather quickly through the NFC North if they continue on this path. So not great news, but not terrible news either. And this could have been, I think, a lot worse day for Packer fans with what Chicago had at their disposal from a salary cap standpoint. Meanwhile, the Vikings, if you're like, maybe there's some bad news there with the Bears, I think there's really great news with the Vikings. They are in total, complete no man's land right now. And that is a great thing if you're a Packer fan. And they're sort of stuck with Kirk Cousins still, and they're probably going to want to draft a quarterback at some point to start going in another direction, but they don't have a premium draft pick to get a premium quarterback. So that complicates things. They're starting to rip their defense down. They cut Eric Kendricks. They're going to cut Zadarius Smith. More on that in just a second. Harrison Smith might potentially get cut. They cut Cam Dantzler, who gets claimed by the Commanders on Monday. Like, they're very much pivoting. They cut Adam Thielen. Like, they're sort of tearing this roster down a little bit, right? They lose Dalvin Tomlinson to the Browns, which is a huge loss for them. He was really, really, really good a season ago. And what do though? Like, instead of like going all out and like starting to sort of tear this roster down and understand that they need to get younger and they need to get just better, and like they go out and they lose a lot of these guys, but then they sign Marcus Davenport to a 1-year deal for pretty premium money. That doesn't make any sense with the timeline that they're on and how they've basically torn this roster down. That makes zero sense whatsoever. Now, like I said, I like the Josh Oliver signing, but you're going out and spending some of the money that you just saved by releasing some of your core players on a number 2 tight end when you just traded for TJ Hawkinson a year ago. They are in a very bizarre situation right now. And I don't know what window they're trying to open or when they're trying to win. They're cutting their previous guys. They're not exactly getting, it's just a very weird spot to be in. So with the Davenport signing, Zadarius Smith is expected to be released, which is going to make him a free agent. As mentioned, they lose Eric Kendricks to the Chargers. They lose Dalvin Tomlinson to the Browns. They've already released a bunch of guys. It is a very odd spot for the Vikings, and that's a very good thing for the Packers. Meanwhile, the Detroit Lions pick up Cam Sutton, a really nice defensive back that is going to help them in the secondary immediately. They needed help at corner. They go on day one and get one of the top corners in this free agency period, something I still expect them to potentially attack aggressively in the draft. Maybe it's a defensive back. Maybe it's not necessarily a corner. Sutton has some flexibility as well, but this is a nice pickup for the Lions and will certainly help their secondary. Those were the main moves in the NFC North, around the NFL, around the Packers. Keisean Nixon is back. Aaron Rodgers, we still don't know. Like I said, I expect we may have a little bit more of an update on that on Tuesday, but that is your free agency day one recap. Thanks for joining me today. I will be right back here tomorrow, hopefully with some additional news on the Packers quarterback situation. Whatever it is, we'll be here to talk about it. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.